And someone who knows about that countdown to execution is Nick Yarris, because, Nick, you spent more than 20 years on death row facing execution, knowing that your death date was going to be announced at some point, knowing that at some point you might be put to death, but it was a crime you were convicted of that you didn't commit, and you were released after DNA evidence proved your innocence. It's good to talk to you this morning. Must have been an absolutely terrible 2 decades thinking that at some point you'd be put to death.
I can only... good morning, Susanna, and good morning, Ben. And thank you for having me back on ITV. To answer what you're saying, it's strange because in my own particular situation, it was so far removed from Patrick's that my 23 years in solitary confinement was actually one of the greatest experiences of my life. I actually only began to have a life and become a good person for going through a situation in which I witnessed so many other broken men like Patrick with their broken families visiting them. And I was the one who would help a prisoner write letters to his family. So I got a close-up look at what you saw from outside.
But of course,
every day there's a...
Sorry,
yeah, I'm
Nick.
sorry. Go ahead.
But you were in this experience, an experience that you say has changed you immeasurably, and you describe as actually a really positive experience. But the whole time, as Susanna said, you were there facing a death sentence for a crime that you knew you didn't commit. That must have been very difficult to wrangle with that.
I was the very first man in the United States to ask for DNA testing to prove my innocence in February of 1988. It took me 15 years, and I had to ask to be executed in order to bring that to fruition. It was a shameful disgrace of what they were doing to me, trying to murder me by actively destroying the DNA evidence after I begged for my chance to prove my innocence.
We should establish this. So we're talking about a case back in 1981. You were 20 years old. You were charged with the abduction, rape and murder of a woman, Linda Craig.
I could have been executed within 60 days. So in 2003, thank God, I was suffering badly from the treatment. They broke my bones over the years, and I had to go to the dentist, and I was infected with hepatitis C. After witnessing the man in the cell next to me die of the same illness and be taunted by the guards and the nurses, I couldn't take it no more, Suzanne. You saw what it's like to have a human being locked up like that, year after year. The next day, someone will go out in the United States and commit homicide. You cannot curb human behavior with the execution of a human being.
Well, it's interesting you say that, Nick Yarris, because obviously, in your case, the death penalty wasn't justified. You didn't commit the crime for which you were sentenced to die. But there are consistently polls here in the UK which say that people do support the death penalty, and that in, certain cases, and in fact, Patrick Murphy, who, faced execution at the point when I interviewed him, said that there are certain heinous crimes for which he, a man condemned to death, fully supports the death penalty, that it does bring closure, that it does, perhaps some people feel, act as a deterrent to murder, to violent rape, to other crimes, and that it does, for the victims, end their suffering because it gets rid of the person who caused all this pain for them.
My apologies, but yes, I was on death row with many men who supported the death penalty, but not for themselves. And the same people answering that so-called poll are given the wrong question. If you walked up to an ordinary British citizen and said, if your child is arrested by the constables in your neighborhood and they've been arrested and charged with homicide, would you have your son or daughter put to death? And they'd say, no, of course not. We don't do that to our children here in Great Britain. But they would say yes to someone else who doesn't have a face or a heart to them. So it's easy to cry for the death penalty for someone else's child. It's easy to say that you support something if the finger's not pointed at you. I've learned that over the last 15 years of my freedom, that It is just an ongoing saga that has not proven anything. When I was on death row in the 1980s, there were so many people on death row, it looked like it would never end. And yet, we're still at the same static level of about 3,000 citizens facing the death penalty in a country of 380 million. So statistically, the death penalty is just a lie. It's not really used a lot. And where it is used, it's badly abused. And this is the last point, and it's sad to think about. The majority of people facing the death penalty don't have the wealth, resources, or abilities to avoid it. Those that do never face the death penalty. A member of the DuPont family killed an ordinary citizen and never even faced the death penalty. But a person on the streets of Philadelphia, like myself, where I grew up, could face the death penalty for a bar fight. That's not fair.
Well, I know that it still divides people, the death penalty. Nick Yarris, it's so interesting hearing your experience. Can I just before we let you go, how has your life been? How have you recovered from that experience since the point at which you were released?
Oh, thank you, Suzanne, because I worked very hard for my education so that I could give myself the opportunity to use my art. I guess like Ricky Gervais with using his latest efforts in Afterlife to get people to really appreciate what it is every one of us is still living under a death sentence. Susanna and Ben, every day of your life you live under a death sentence. There's no court. You'll never know when it's coming. But don't you want your last days to be full and purposeful and happy? We all face the most tragic times ahead. We know they're coming. I think it's time that we stop executing human beings for the sake of a lie. The death penalty is definitely that.
Well, you've got an extraordinary and unique perspective on how we should all live our lives. That is without a doubt.
Undoubtedly, yeah.
Nick Yarris, thank you so much for talking to us this morning.